We've got some inclement weather rolling in. Rain and ice storms, potential school closures, road closures, potential loss of power. So I thought it would be a really good opportunity for us to talk about the full spectrum preparedness fundamental of shelter. So stick around and let's talk about it. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Grumpy Acres. You know, anytime is a good time to talk about the fundamental of shelter. With these ice storms potentially rolling in and causing problems, just seems like it's even more pertinent now than otherwise. But so don't think that you need a reason to talk about this and think about this. This is something that we should be thinking about all the time. Full spectrum preparedness is a framework that gives us the tools to put together a plan that allows us to be as prepared as we possibly can be for almost any circumstance. This video series, as I said before, is not a nuts and bolts video series. We're talking about a high level view of full spectrum preparedness, and we're going through each one of the 10 aspects or fundamentals of full spectrum preparedness or full spectrum homesteading, so that we can get a larger idea on how it all fits together. And then once we've done that and we've got a good grasp of that, we're going to start burrowing in and talking about the nuts and bolts features of preparedness as it pertains to full spectrum preparedness. Now, this list I'm going to go over for shelters is developed off a tool that a friend of mine and I developed for Yoda when she was a real estate agent. She was doing a lot of work with people that were buying getaway properties or bug out properties, or they were looking to relocate from someplace that was less friendly to their beliefs or their financial situation. And so we tried developing this tool so that she could quantify a property and give a graphical representation in the form of a number between 1 and 100 on how good of a preparedness property it was in its present state. So that's where these ideas come from. And so let's get started. Okay, the first aspect of the fundamental of shelter is the house and the outbuilding. Now, one thing you need to remember, these fundamentals, these different aspects apply to any place you call home, whether you live in an economy apartment in the city, a suburban house, a house out on property in the country. Shoot, even if you live in a slab walled expedition tent at 7,500 feet in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, where the base snowfall is 500 inches a year, this applies to you. And yes, we met a couple that actually lived like that, lived in a slab wall tent up in the mountains, and the slab wall tent was actually an upgrade from the teepee they had lived in the previous 2 years. So these different aspects, they apply no matter where we are. So don't think that you have to have property to have all this stuff. Some of it may not apply to you because of your situation, but it's still something you need to think about, okay? So the first aspect, the house and the outbuilding. Number one, does the property where you live, is it livable? A livable house. Now, when I say livable, I mean it's got 4 solid walls, it's got a floor, it's got a roof doesn't leak, and it's weatherproof. You know, we at the very least weather tight. From weather tight we can become weatherproof. But if you're not weatherproof, it's really not livable because you're exposed to the elements and all sorts of things happen, like you get sick quicker or more often, you get problems with mold and all that. So number one, a livable house. Number two, is there at least 400 square feet of usable storage on the property? Now, I know that people in the tiny houses and the economy apartments are going to say, well, I got 900 square feet. That's actually a good sized property in the city at some places. But I've only got 900 square feet. There's no way that I've got 400 usable feet of storage, 400 square feet of storage. If that's the case, it's not optimal, but it's not something that should put a brake on your plans. All right. You can find alternative ways to store things. Put a bed up on cinder blocks or bricks and store underneath the bed. Store underneath furniture. Tuck stuff away in every every usable corner that you can find. 400 feet, 400 square feet was the number that we came up with, because most people have that much stuff tied up in preparedness items or items they need that to keep their household going or work on the homestead. Okay, so 400 square feet is a target that we're shooting for, but it's not something that's set in stone. You have to adjust these numbers for your situation. Ideally, we want to look for it, but we don't have to have it. Okay, next thing is a basement or tornado shelter. This is really important, especially if you live in areas where you're prone to tornadoes. Like we live in Tornado Alley, and it's really important. In fact, the house we're living in right now has actually been hit by a tornado, and we've got a great big concrete tornado shelter right outside the front door. This is important for in case of a natural disaster. A lot of places can't have it. We lived in a little farmhouse that was on a stacked rock foundation. We didn't have a storm shelter. So as far as that preparedness aspect goes, it was not ideal. In fact, it was pretty darn bad that our emergency preparedness was crawling into the bathtub and covering ourselves with a blanket and hoping for the best. You know, we want to look for these things. If you live in an apartment building, know where you can go in that complex for shelter. If you're living in a yurt out in the woods in the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, wherever, yeah, you really don't really have much choice. All right, but hopefully if you're living someplace like that, tornadoes and storms like that are not something you have to worry about. The next thing we want to look at when we're looking at a property is, do you have a 2-car garage that's enclosed? Ideally enclosed. The reason why we want a 2-car garage or something equivalent is because most families have 2 vehicles. And so we're looking for a place to store vehicles. And one thing that we've learned is that having your vehicles parked under shelter, even if it's a carport, it helps maintain the vehicles, keeping them out of the snow and the rain directly as much as possible helps increase the longevity of your vehicles. And that goes for motorcycles, side by sides, farm utility, tractors, skid loaders. Having it under shelter is just way better for the equipment. You end up spending less money maintaining it if you're able to store your things like that. Next thing we're going to look at, does the property have a second house or guest house or some livable building on it? That's going to increase the value in your preparedness stance. If you've got a place where if somebody is in need of shelter, you can bring them in and house them in a separate building, where you're not on top of each other. That really improves the preparedness stance on that property. At the very least, if you've got a secondary building that's livable, if say a pandemic rolls around and it was going to be as bad as what they thought the 2019 2020 pandemic was going to be, it would be nice to have a building where you could quarantine somebody that's sick and everybody else can go about their lives without having to worry about being exposed to this sick person. So again, if you're living in suburbia, that could look like a small portable building on the back of your property, on the back of your lot. If you're in an apartment, we're always looking to better our position, and having a larger house, having more space is always an improvement from a preparedness stance. Now you may enjoy living in the city and that's where you want to be. So, it's a give and take thing with some of these aspects. And the last thing underneath housing and outbuildings, are there usable outbuildings? Now, these are buildings, they don't have to be weatherproof, weathertight. They can be a lean-to, they can be an animal enclosure, it can be an unheated outbuilding, where you can't control the climate. It can be any of these things. And the reason why this is important, because again, storing your things inside out of the weather, having the sun beat down on everything those UV rays destroy plastics and fabrics. The wind and the rain tear stuff up. Having some place to store your equipment and your tools is very important. All right. It's gonna increase the longevity of them, and you're not going to have to worry about replacing or repairing them as much. All right, we're going to move on to the second aspect of shelter, energy and heating. This is an important aspect because, and I feel kind of stupid explaining it, but our freedom is based on how much energy that we have, that we can put into our lifestyle and what we're doing. And so if you buy a property or you're in a property and you're having to worry about heating and energy usage, things like that, it makes it harder on you. Let's talk about energy and heating now. Number one, are there utilities on the premise? Now, remember, this list is based off of a tool that we use to quantify properties on the preparedness. If you're living someplace where there's no utilities, it's going to be harder to live hard is not the right word. And if you're living on a property where there's no utilities, it just opens up a whole new set of problems that you have to deal with. So having utilities on the property. Now, when I say utilities, don't think I'm talking specifically about being hooked up to the grid or hooked up to rural water or city water or whatever that, because the next aspect underneath heating and energy, or energy and heating, is alternative energy systems. So if you're not hooked up to the grid, not hooked up to utilities, if you've got alternative energy systems, as in solar, hydroelectric, or wind, you become your own power company. And go over to Tag and Be at Life Done Free. They've got a several really good videos talking about what it takes to become your own power company or your own water company. So it's something that is going to help. Now, if you've got utilities and these alternative energy systems, that just makes your property that much more ranked higher on the preparedness scale, if you will, because you've got more options. The utilities, yes, you're tied in and you're beholden to the power company or the water company for these things. And if you've got these alternative systems in place, it just gives you more options. All right. Next thing we want to think about is, do we have a battery bank for these alternative energy systems? Because a lot of systems, your system generates the power. Do you have a way to store that power? Because that's one of the things in permaculture is we're always looking at ways to store energy, whether it's in a pond that's high on the elevation, or it's in a water catchment system that's elevated above ground level, so you've got good head pressure. We're always looking at ways to store energy, and battery banks are something that a lot of people that aren't into the alternative energy systems, they really don't think about a lot. So you can have a solar system or wind system or hydroelectric that generates power for your house, but if you don't have a battery bank to store that energy for future use, if the wind stops blowing, your wind turbine's useless. If the sun's not shining, you don't have any energy available. So we want to have a battery bank in place for these systems. Next thing, and I'm going through these, and they're not in really any specific order because they all kind of mesh together. This is just the way that we put them down on paper right now to get them in a form that was. So the next thing, and keeping that in mind, the next thing we're going to talk about is windows. Does the house have modern dual pane or greater windows in it? Now, this is really important for energy conservation. I don't know if you've ever lived in a house with single pane windows, like old 1950s single pane windows, or you lived in a house where the windows were not sealed properly. This can be a huge drain on your bank account, as you're spending a lot of time creating energy that's being sent outside. It's either radiating through the window itself, or it's leaking around cracks in the windows. And this goes for doors too. You want your doors to be energy efficient too. It's real important. And this is one of those things, everything we're talking about, if you don't have it, it's going to cost money. And we have to decide where we're going to use our financial capital to get the most gain for ourselves. And, I put alternative energy systems first. I think windows are probably, as far as importance or the not importance, the priority of it, if you will, the priority of getting it good windows in place versus an alternative energy system, probably in my book ranks a little bit higher than setting up solar or something like that. But it's something that we need to think about, and we need to put on our list. If the house that we're living in needs these things put in place, then we should do that. Do what's going to benefit you the most first, right? Now, when we're talking about the insulation effects of windows, we also need to talk about the insulation effects of actual insulation in our house. So the room I'm sitting in, whenever we moved in here, it's in the metal portion of the building, and it literally, they had taken the drywall off and they had taken the insulation out, and it was literally bare metal exposed to the outside. And I could come in here in the middle of winter and use my fingernail and scrape ice crystals off the inside of the metal. That's how exposed it was. And that cold air was flowing into the house. Well, we got it, we rehabbed it, and as you can see, we redid the walls and everything, and we fixed the outside wall and put insulation on it. And we went from almost zero insulation factor to like an R19. I think there's one space in the wall where I got it up to R23 because of the insulation that I was using. So having good insulation in a house is important. And if you're living in an old house, or you're living in a tent or something like that, there's not really much you can do about it, right? You can think of different ways to do it. You can hang blankets on the wall or something like that, but we want to think about ways of insulating our house even better than what it is. The next aspect under energy and heating is a backup heating system. Now, this is important because if you lose power, you need some way to heat your house. We don't want to freeze to death. That is not something we want to strive for, right? So we want to look at things like wood stoves, fireplaces, fireplace inserts that are more efficient than just a regular fireplace. If you don't have the ability to put something like that in, you need to be looking for energy efficient space heaters, the little propane buddy heaters, or a kerosene heater. You can use a kerosene heater inside with running a minimal risk of CO2 poisoning. So these are things we need to think about. Ideally, we want a wood stove or a fireplace or a fireplace insert. In fact, I'll tell you a little story about the importance of them. And I'm sure some of you have heard this story from me before. We had the kitchen redone at our old house, and we had a propane stove put in. And they turned the gas off, put the stove in, turned the gas back on. Well, we forgot to light the furnace. And so whenever winter rolled around, the system would kick on, but it would never light because there was no gas going to it. The fan was blowing. We heated that entire winter on nothing but a wood stove. And it was comfortable. I mean, there were days that we woke up where it was down in I think one time it got down to like 55 degrees one morning when it was -10 outside, but we fired the wood stove up, got it nice and hot, and heated the house with it. So these are things, that was our not paying attention that caused that. But what happens if the power goes out and you've got a house that's on electric heating, the furnace is electric, and it depends on that, and you can't heat? We have to have alternative and backup heating systems. Is another backup system that a lot of people don't think about. Backup hot water systems. Our system is propane. It's got an electric igniter. So if the power goes out, we have to go in and make sure that we can manually light it, but we have to make sure it stays lit and it doesn't go out. You can see the problems with that and the dangers in that. So we need to have backup hot water systems. So these backup hot water systems can come in. I've got a couple of different ones labeled here or put down here to talk about. Number one, it can be a thermofin plate system, which when you're talking about hot water systems, it's basically a tank that's got a thin metal plate in it or fins that's immersed in the water, and they transfer heat from a wood stove into the water. Which the water can be circulated through a pump or through convection. You know, the hot water rises, forces it through the pipes. It could be done like that. The other one is an integral passive solar water heating system. And what this is you take a tank, paint it black. It's on the outside of the house. Ideally, you fill it with glycerol so it doesn't freeze. And then convection causes the hot liquid to go through the house into a tubing system that's inside a water tank, and it heats it up by convection, and then you use that water as a supplement to your hot water heater. Or you can have the water directly go into the tank and heat up and be used that way. In cold climates, that one's a little bit more tricky because you got to keep it from freezing. The glycerol method keeps the system from freezing up and is much more efficient on energy transfer. Now, you might think that the next aspect we're going to talk about, since we're talking about a backup hot water system, is water itself. Now, we've already discussed that under the fundamentals of water video, and I'll put a link right up here so that you can go watch that if you want to, and see what we want to think about whenever water is concerned on our property, as far as full spectrum preparedness goes. So we're not going to discuss water. The next thing we're going to talk about, and this is the last aspect of the shelter fundamental, is environmental. Now, when I say environmental, these are things on the property outside the house that affect the living conditions on the property or in your apartment, all that. First things first, is the home or is the dwelling above the 100-year floodplain? Now, this is important because a lot of people don't understand what 100-year floodplains are. So 100-year flood, you can have 2 100-year floods happen within a short period of time. What they are is statistically, the water will not get this high except for once in 100 years. And we need to be aware of that. So on our property, when we moved in, they had photos. We were showing photos of the property the last time a 100-year flood happened here, and it was 2013. And if you've seen videos of our property, we've got a pond out on the back of the property. Well, the 100-year floodplain is high enough that it tops the bank of that pond. Well, it used to top it. I don't think it will top it now because we had the pond redone, but it would flood all the way up into that area. Now, our house is a good 5-10 feet above that. So we're above the 100-year floodplain where the house is. Now, the back of the property, there are places on the property where the water will flow 20 feet deep. So we have to take that into account whenever we're thinking about a shelter. We don't want to build any outbuildings back there that could possibly be destroyed should one of these floods roll around. So we're not only looking for the home to be above the 100-year floodplain, we also want all of our outbuildings to be above it. You know, your livestock, we want to make sure that all the shelter on the property is above that floodplain. Now, if you're looking at a piece of property, that's one of the things that you should make sure that you do yourself, or you have the realtor do for you, is look at the flood charts for insurance purposes. You want to know if any of the property is sitting on the floodplain. You definitely want to know if any of the buildings are sitting on the floodplain. There's places on our property that when it floods, there's a slough back there where water will get into it and it'll stand. And it's not 100-year flood level, but it's just a regular every annual flood levels. So we need to think about these things. The next thing is if we've got the alternative energy or the alternative heating systems in for the wood stove, the fireplace insert, anything like that, do we have hardwood available to harvest? If you've got a wood stove and you have to go someplace else to harvest it, or you have to pay somebody to bring cut and split logs in, that just makes it that much harder for you. We want stuff locally that we can get in a quick and timely manner, and we can process it ourselves, so we're not having to rely on somebody else. Well, that's about it in a nutshell. If there's anything that you think I missed, or any comments you want to make, feel free to make a comment below. In fact, I want you guys to. I love the interaction with people, and I love hearing what you think about the ideas that we're putting forth and what ideas you have, because we actually learn stuff from you guys. This is an interactive sharing experience. We're not sitting up here trying to teach you anything. We are sharing our experience and sharing our knowledge, and we want you to share yours with us. So make a comment down below if there's anything that you think I missed, or anything you think is important. It may actually end up on this tool that I'm using to evaluate properties. All right. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up. Go ahead and hit that notification button. That way you'll know whenever the next full spectrum preparedness video drops, or one of my permaculture videos, or one of Yoda's cooking videos, or even just a short about the goofy stuff that the animals do around the property. You know, it's all there for you. So let YouTube know that you like this type of content. Share it if there's somebody that is concerned about something like this, or they are looking for this type of information. Go ahead and share this video with them. Let them know that it's out there. Most importantly, at the end of the day, I want you guys to go live a lifetime free. Take care. Thanks, Milo.